Now let's get one thing straight off the bat. I am a big fan of Doctor Who. I refuse to call myself a Whovian. I definitely lean more towards the original series, though I like my fair share of New Who as well. With all that said, I was pretty excited to hear that the BBC were planning on colorizing the Daleks. For those who do not know, the Daleks was the second ever storyline from Doctor Who to air. Though as to avoid confusion, I'll be calling the serial by its alternate name, The Mutants. To make a long story short, the series was not doing so hot in the beginning. Low ratings during the transmission of the first serial, An Unearthly Child, made it where the BBC were planning on pulling the plug to the show altogether. And then The Mutants came around. Running for 7 episodes, this epic serial saved the series. The British public were introduced to the completely new threat of the Daleks. At a time where most alien threats were nothing more than guys in rubber suits, these creatures stood out as something that was truly unique. The ratings for the serial nearly doubled over the airing of The Mutants. 6.9 million tuned in for the first episode, and 10.4 million people tuned in for the finale. Such high viewership ensured that Doctor Who would air past its original 13-episode run. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say if it was not for The Mutants, Doctor Who would simply no longer exist today. And I mean that literally, because if the series ended way back when, there ain't no way all the episodes wouldn't be lost. The Mutants is a terribly important serial in the show's history, objectively the most important. And getting back to the start, I was really excited when I heard that it was being colorized. Truth be told, I'm not the biggest fan of colorization. I'm a proud believer in watching something in its original black and white glory. With that said though, I still find that colorization offers a different way to view a piece of media if it's done right. Never would I prefer colorization over the black and white original, but I still find it very interesting in and of itself. So yeah, I was looking forward to watching the serial in color. But then my excitement had a thick layer of worriment added on top of it when I heard that the storyline would be cut down to oh my, 75 minutes! Remember, The Mutants was originally a 7-parter that had clocked in at 169 minutes, just shy of being 3 hours long. They took a nearly 3-hour-long serial and cut it down to only an hour and 15 minutes. So yeah, to say the very least, I was skeptical of how good this colorization would be after finding out about the greatly reduced runtime. But now, after watching the colorized edit for myself, I can safely say that Doctor Who, The Daleks in Color, is a mess. A unique mess. A fascinating mess. A mess I'll probably watch again in the future. Okay, before we dive deep into the video, a little warning is in order. I'm going to be talking about all the edits and changes in the new version of the serial itself, assuming you already have a decent understanding of the original story. To be honest, if you haven't already seen The Mutants, I'm amazed you clicked on this video in the first place. With that said, if you haven't seen the serial, you're gonna be really lost throughout the majority of this video. Sorry about that. Okay, now that's out of the way, let's begin. First, let's talk about the actual colorization. For the most part, it is really lovely. The colors just pop. It really nails the look of early color television. An era where TV producers really wanted the colors to stand out so they convinced a wider audience to trade in their black and white TVs for colored ones. The Daleks are especially wonderful to see in color. I adore the original silver designs and they simply look amazing here. There is never a single second where they looked anything less than perfect in this colorization. All scenes inside of the TARDIS also looked really great. I don't know why, but the colorization did seem to look the best inside of the ship, though that may just be a personal preference. With that said though, there are still some things I didn't care for in this colorization. Sometimes the actors' faces lose their natural tone and become far too pink. Look at Hartnell's face here. It's so pink that it's kinda distracting. Also, there is some noticeable color bleeding from the top of his face to his hairline. It's so bad, I honestly wonder if they're trying to make it seem like he was standing under a pink light here, but I really don't think that's what they're trying to go for. Now look at this lab scene. All of their faces are an odd pinkish gray color. I get that the scene is supposed to be in low lighting, but still, it doesn't make it any less unnatural. Also, I find the intro to be oddly downplayed from a color perspective, though to be fair, I may have just been disappointed to see that they didn't reuse the Jon Pertwee color scheme here like they had for some of the reanimated episodes. Now, are these nitpicks? Yes, 100%. Though these moments did make it, for me at least, where I was never fully sold on the colorization effect as a whole. Granted, I find these moments to be far less of an issue than some of the frankly weird color choices they have made at certain points. To set the scene, the Doctor and his companions land on a dead planet, coincidentally being another alternate name for the serial. Petrified trees as far as the eye can see, dead animals apparently suspended in a metal mummification, plants that shudder like eggshells when they're handled too roughly. In the original black and white footage, it is easy to imagine the jungle as nothing but a collection of dull grays. So, how do they colorize it? They use earthly greens for the trees and bright pink for the vegetation, of course. This is supposed to be a dead forest. It's why the Thals are so desperate to kill the Daleks later in the story. The land is no longer suited for them to live off of. But you honestly get the opposite impression here with how bright the colors are. I honestly think they just went overboard here with trying to make every color pop. The luscious colors here actively go against what the characters are saying about the setting.
Stone trees are all very well.
Well, if that's the case, then why are they green then? Everything is so green here that there is a visible green backlight on all the characters inside of the forest. Heck, at the end of the story, Hartnell is observing the soil to see if it's still usable, and all of it appears as a Technicolor rainbow. Why would you even colorize soil and dirt to be these colors in the first place? Sometimes the colorization isn't consistent with itself. Look at the exterior shots of the Dalek city. In some shots it's only white and gray, but in other shots they have reds, blues, and greens coloring the top of the buildings. How did you even let that happen? There's really no excuse for something this being blatantly wrong when you have full control of what colors go where. Okay, now let's move on to another problem I have with the colorization. Okay, yeah, I know I got really negative there for a bit, but I do want to reiterate that the majority of the colorization itself was really well done. It is especially well done considering the fact that only 4 people worked on the colorization. Rich Temple, Timothy K. Brown, Scott Burdett, and Kieran Hyman really do deserve the highest of praise for the astounding work they were able to achieve, especially when considered the fact they're not exactly working with the highest quality of footage. Though, here's the thing. If colorization was the only change made, I wouldn't have even bothered to make this video in the first place. No. The real reason I consider this release to be a mess, and why this release is so controversial in the first place, is the actual editing of the story itself. To reiterate, they cut 169 minutes of television down to a mere 75. Of course, an easy thing they could cut off was the opening and closing credits of each episodes. Legit feels weird watching that scene without the text immediately starting to roll up. And yeah, they cut off the cliffhanger at the end of episode 7, though it is funny watching this version, knowing it ended literal seconds before they all fell down. There are also some other omissions that make perfect sense for cutting out. One thing they cut out was any mention of the weird lock on the TARDIS door. In the original episode, they mentioned that the TARDIS has a special lock that only Susan and the Doctor knows how to open.
There are 21 different holes inside the lock. There's one right place and 20 wrong ones. If you make a mistake, the whole inside of the lock will melt.
It only really serves to make it where Susan has to be the one to run back to the forest at the end of the second episode. It makes sense why the new version cut it out entirely. The fact that Barbara and the Doctor are terribly weak and Ian can't walk properly is already a fine enough reason for why Susan has to be the one to run to the TARDIS in the first place. Also, I'm fairly certain that this special lock never shows up again, so cutting it out does help with keeping continuity for the rest of the series. In the same vein, they also cut out any mention of the food machine present in the first episode. A device the Doctor uses to create any type of food that he or his companions may want. Obviously, this was originally in the serial to explain how the crew would eat during their travels, but it serves no real purpose to the story of the mutants, so its exclusion makes sense. They cut out the scenes of Susan thinking she sees someone in the jungle with her. Now this works in the original serial, serving as foreshadowing for the Thals that make their first appearance at the start of episode 3, though again, it was something that could be easily cut out. Okay, some quick context. The first Doctor straight up kidnaps Ian and Barbara in the first episode, which leaves their relationship getting to a pretty rocky start. There's a scene in The Mutants where Ian demands the Doctor to take them back to their respected time. It actually makes for a pretty effective arc for television at the time, Ian, Barbara, and the Doctor slowly learn to trust each other more and more through the first few stories to air. But in the context of this colorization, yeah, you can very easily cut out the drama with the three. They also cut out the scene where the group removes the security camera from watching them inside of their cell, though this creates a problem later in the story. See, they use this said piece of broken camera to jam the door open later for their escape. But here there's no explanation for how they got the camera down in the first place, making the broken camera a deus ex machina in the new version because it quite literally comes out of nowhere. They reworked some of the Dalek scenes with new lines to fast-track some parts of the story. And you know what? This is actually a really clever method for speeding up the plot. In theory, at least. Several new scenes have it where the Daleks are observing the characters through security cameras. Granted, it makes absolutely no sense where they have their cameras set up and, oh hey, they're watching Doctor Who in the background, that's nice. These new inserts not only make it where you can quickly cut through the original scene, but they also have new Dalek voices talk over them, quickly explain what the characters were originally doing in the episode. A really effective use of this comes at the end of the story, where the Daleks are observing all of the people invading their city. This makes it where they can easily cut down on all scenes of people carefully walking through the caves, and thank goodness! I think most people would agree with me here when I say the cave stuff really dragged in the original story. Funnily enough, though, it does make it where this guy's death has even less impact on the story than it originally had. I didn't even know that was possible. Another scene they used the Daleks to fast-track is where the Doctor and his companions first escape the city and meet up with the rest of the Thals for the first time. This new version has the Dalek scanners quickly cut through sections of the dialogue, alongside them cutting entire lines later in the scene. And these changes really irk me. First off, it cuts my favorite line in the entire serial.
Explanation might be better. It's stupid and ridiculous, but it's the only one that fits. A dislike for the unlike. They're afraid of you because you're different from them. So whatever you do, it doesn't matter.
But they also cut out the moral dilemma between Ian and the rest. Some quick context. The Doctor lost an essential piece of the TARDIS in the Dalek city, and they need the Thals to fight against the Daleks so they can get their fluid link back. Thing is, the Thals are extreme pacifists. Though the others want to convince the Thals to fight to get their fluid link back, Ian has a different perspective on the matter. He thinks it's unfair of them to persuade the Thals to fight on their behalf, for a problem they got themselves into in the first place. Ian will not have the Thals fight for them, but he will convince the Thals to fight for themselves. It's legitimately great storytelling, and it firmly establishes that Ian is a man of great morals. In this new version, though, they cut this scene out altogether. They jump right from the main cast realizing they need the fluid link back to Ian thinking of ways to have the Thals fight against the Daleks. In the original version, it was made expressly clear that Ian would only have the Thals fight for themselves. Heck, the episode directly states as such.
I will not allow you to use the Thals to fight for us.
In the new one, there is nothing to indicate that. In this re-edit, it plays as Ian trying to make the Thals fight for them, and I find this really insulting to his character. Another example of new Dalek inserts is present in the treaty scene. To explain it real quick, in the original serial, the Daleks have Susan write up a treaty with the Thals to trick them into walking into an ambush. It's a good scene in and of itself, and has some great moments I really like. Just the idea of one of the companions trusting the Daleks enough to write a treaty for them is something you can really only get away with in the first Dalek story. Also, it has this moment I really like.
Stop that noise!
The Daleks are such joyless creatures that they don't even recognize laughter. That is such great storytelling. However, the new version cuts this scene out entirely and changes it to where the Daleks forged the treaty and signed Susan's name at the bottom to trick the Thals. That's a really effective method for cutting a good bit of time, though its exclusion does create some problems later in the story. In this scene, the Doctor and his companions are high up in one of the Dalek buildings, watching as the Thals unknowingly walk right into the trap that the Daleks have arranged for them.
I saw someone cross that space. The Thals! They come for food supplies.
Susan knows this here because she literally arranged for it to happen. But here's the thing. They kept this line in the new version.
The Thals! They come for food supplies.
Walking into an ambush.
How do you know that? Remember, according to this re-edit, Susan was not involved with the treaty whatsoever. She has no knowledge of it. It makes no sense for her to automatically know why the Thals have come to the city. Yes, the new version still has Susan discuss the idea of a treaty with the Thals.
Aladdin says unless we can help them arrange some sort of treaty with the Daleks, well, they're all going to die.
But again, she's no longer the one to write it up. She has no idea that the Daleks invited the Thals over, and she doesn't know the Thals' intentions for coming to the city. And the Doctor here certainly shouldn't know that the Daleks are waiting for the Thals. Here I guess they just make wild assumptions that just happen to be right. Okay, as for entire scenes that they had cut out, that's all I can list off the top of my head. I'm sure there's more, but I really want to move on to something else now. Cause here's the thing, they didn't just cut out whole sections to shorten it, they shaved seconds and minutes off of every scene to get the runtime down. And you know what, for the most part, it's pretty alright. So what, they cut out the flower breaking in Susan's hands in this version. Okay, funnily enough, making this the only version of the story where the flower lives. And yeah, in most other scenes they cut out little stuff like that. Details that are not necessary for the story as a whole. Though sometimes you can really feel the cuts, lending to some sections feeling incredibly rushed and unnatural. One example of this would be where Susan is running back to the TARDIS. As it plays out, it quickly cuts from Susan to the Daleks, to the rest in their cell, and the quick cuts just seem to loop on from there. It's not bad per se, there's technically nothing wrong with it, but the cuts are jarring nonetheless. They cut down on a lot of stuff where the Doctor is telling the Thals to shine mirrors at the Dalek city to interfere with the scanners. Actually, the new version cuts out so much of this subplot that it never actually explains how the mirrors interfere with the Dalek sensors in the first place. Whoops. Though, without a doubt, the worst section in the new edit by far is the elevator escape scene. To give some quick context, the group managed to take down one of the Daleks, right after they jammed the door open with a broken camera like I mentioned earlier. They take out the deceased Dalek, and Ian climbs into the empty casing. The group then travel down the vast, empty hallways of the city, soon running into another Dalek. The Dalek is about to call reinforcements, but Susan quickly acts as if she's running to save the day. The Dalek helps Ian to bring Susan over to the next room. Once inside, they lock a metal door between them and certain death, though the Dalek quickly realizes their trick and calls for others to cut down the metal door. Barbara, Susan, and the Doctor ride up a nearby elevator while Ian is trapped inside of the casing, but is able to free himself right before the Daleks cut through the doorway. After Ian reaches the floor with the others, they push a hefty statue down the elevator shaft, ensuring that no other Daleks will be able to come up to where they are now. In the new version, the whole scene flashes by in a series of quick cuts that last less than a second. It goes by so quick that I honestly wouldn't be surprised if a newcomer wouldn't understand what's supposed to be happening here at all. Look at this. For no reason, they cut from the group talking with each other before they reach a Dalek, to them reaching said Dalek, and then immediately back to the previous scene for a split second. Why would you edit it like that? It makes the scene confusing to watch. With how it's edited, it's hard to tell who is talking at first, Ian in the Dalek casing or the actual Dalek. Here the real Dalek says he's about to call on someone else, and Susan immediately runs the very next second. That happens way too fast for someone to properly take it in. And the worst part is that they cut out the part where Ian and the others pushed the statue down the shaft. There is no reason, literally no reason here why the Daleks wouldn't just ride up the elevator and exterminate them on the floor they reached. I cannot stress enough that this whole section is easily the worst part of this new version for me. It is nearly incoherent with the frankly awful way it's edited. Okay, I'm getting tired of talking about all they cut out. How about we go on over about some of the stuff they added now? There are a few 3D shots of the TARDIS landing and taking off, and of the Dalek city seen from overhead. Honestly, I'm mixed on these shots. They do look nice and all, even if the city inserts do suffer from what I mentioned earlier about inconsistent colors. Also, later in the story, they add rain to some of the city scenes, but it literally makes no sense because there's no rain when they cut back to the Thals in the forest. Like, how do you even get that wrong? Going back to the new shots of the TARDIS, I find it a bit off as well. The picture here is way too clear, too sharp for the scenes it's in, creating a rather noticeable disconnect from the old material and new. Though other than that, the new TARDIS shots really do pop, and they are nice to look at. Another odd thing here is the addition of flashbacks that happen within the story. this 75-minute story. Characters will just be talking, and then the screen will cut back to just a few minutes earlier to show what they're talking about.
The man who shouted to warn us.
Thank you.
Ah, yes, thanks for the flashback. I nearly forgot what happened 2 minutes ago. To be fair with the flashbacks though, I do understand why they're here. See, early Classic Who was essentially shot like a live show with very few edits and many long takes. I imagine the flashbacks were necessary in this re-edit to cut away to something so they could shorten the scenes down more effectively. Though still, it does feel a little insulting to the audience during some scenes. Okay, I feel like I've been critical for far too long. I do want to address some additions that I did fully like. At the end of the story, when they knock out the Daleks' main power unit, a new insert shot of electrical arcs gripping across the city plays. This helps in visualizing the Daleks' defeat as something that happened all over the city, and not just in the small room they happened to be in at the time. At the part where Ian and the rest finally get through the cave system, they change from them looking at a stock photo that honestly really doesn't match, to an actual perspective shot of one of the Dalek city hallways. I know you could argue the original shot makes more sense, seeing how they were following the piping system through the caves, but then this opens up the question as to how they got from here to here. Having them just reach the city outright from the caves is a nice change. I really like the new effects they added with the Daleks themselves. Now, whenever the creatures fire their weapons, a nice laser effect flashes out of their arm cannon. They even changed what it looks like when they hit their target. In the original serial, the screen would just switch to a negative, while here there is a nice bright effect added on top of the footage that goes along nicely with the new laser effects. Also, the Dalek POV shots have been altered to make them look more convincing than they were previously. And, as I mentioned earlier, they also included a few more Dalek lines voiced by Nick Briggs, with some recordings done by the original voice actor, David Graham. Aside from the reworked Dalek scenes, they also sprinkle in some of the new recordings over other sections as well. Notably at the end where the countdown for the bomb begins. They add in the Daleks' measurement of time, the rails.
Begin countdown, 100 beginning now. Donation in 50 rails.
They also added in the Daleks yelling exterminate more often. Though to nitpick one more time, there are some points where the new voices don't quite blend with the old.
My vision is impaired. I cannot see. Keep away from me.
Why did you even add the new line there? The audience can clearly see the Daleks' vision is covered up. Never mind. Well, now that I mentioned the new Dalek voices, is there any other sounds they added in the re-edit? The answer is yes. A hard yes. First off, they inserted sound effects into practically every scene. And you know what? I like them for what they are. A lot of them did stick out as being unnatural, but I honestly can't tell if I'm just saying that because I know they weren't there originally. So I'll just chalk the sound effects as being a nice quality of life change. Although I do want to mention one bad one I noticed. Could you have possibly chosen a more stock sounding punch there? On top of the new sound effects, there is also some new music to go alongside the re-edit, while there is little to none in the original serial. Now each scene is accompanied with a score that helps to really set the mood. It's actually kind of hard for me to discuss any one aspect of the new music because it's present in every single scene of the re-edit. I'll just leave it to this. I think it's really nice, but way too overbearing in some scenes. Especially in that horrible escape scene I was talking about earlier. I really think they should have lowered the music in some of these scenes, because it's real close to making it hard to understand what the characters are saying sometimes. Okay, in terms of things I have to say about this colorization, that's kind of all I have. But before I leave you, I want to bring up one last thing. On the Blu-ray there is a making of documentary. In this featurette they say this.
The pace of 60s Doctor Who. It's not just slower, though sometimes it is, but the rhythms, the tempo of 1960s television can take a bit of getting used to.
Bring a new audience to those episodes. Get youngsters looking at those episodes and
Got to edit it like you would modern telly.
I really disagree with this sentiment. Yes, 60s Doctor Who does feel different from modern television, and it is those differences that make it some people's favorite era of the show to watch. And even if this re-edit piques the interest of some newcomers, so what? After watching an abridged version, would they really be interested in watching the original serial? I doubt it. And even if they did, the feel of the two is so radically different, I doubt they would even like the black and white episodes in the first place. There is one change in this re-edit that I've been saving to show till now. It's a rather famous line flub in the original.
It's possible that they may have been anti-radiation gloves. Drugs.
And this too they had removed.
Possible that they may have been anti-radiation drugs.
It is well known that Hartnell flubbed a lot of his lines, and while yes, these are objectively mistakes, they're mistakes that people love noticing. The line flubs, on top of all other iniquities with 60s British television, is what gives this era of the show its charm and appeal. But this re-edit takes away that charm and replaces it with conventions of modern television. It should be the responsibility of people to make Classic Who on its own terms, not the other way around. To reiterate, I did enjoy this colorization, but man if it doesn't suffer from a lot of flaws. None of them are major or anything, but it's so many little things stacked on top of each other. Quite literally death by 1,000 cuts. I really think a lot of the issues I had with this re-edit were brought on by the fact that it was only 75 minutes. Man, I can't get over that. Shortening a nearly 3-hour serial down to less than half of its original runtime. I honestly have no doubt this would have fared a lot better if they had only cut it down to something like 2 hours. Heck, even if it was a clean hour and a half, that still would have helped to give some of the scenes some much needed breathing room. I hope future colorizations only continue to get better and better. I know I sounded pretty negative throughout the majority of this video, and I do completely disagree with why these re-edits are being made in the first place. Still, I am interested to see what the future holds for Classic Who.